button. So fantastic. So hi everyone, welcome to this evening's webinar. I'm Sherry. I represent the Finchley N3 and 12 pollinator project. So we're quite a big chunk of Finchley, which is located in North London, UK. We are a group of volunteer residents, and we decided to come together and improve the environment here in Finchley for our local pollinators. We have a current initiative called Stops, which is funded by Waitrose, in which we are focusing on feeding pollinators. So that's basically growing from seed pollinator-friendly plants and planting them in different parts of Finchley in community spaces such as churches, synagogues, schools, surgeries, hospitals, elderly care homes, all of these lovely places. And we are very proud of our neighbors because a lot of these community spaces indeed ask for our flowers and are putting effort into watering them, into caring for them. So we're very lucky to have a really keen and nature-loving neighborhood. We wanted to then step up and start providing shelter to the pollinators. And as a first step, we decided to invite an expert because this is a topic that's, I wouldn't say new at all, but there's quite a lot of science involved, and we thought we would bring an expert to learn about the best practices in providing shelter. So we are very lucky to have Scarlett Weston from a national charity called Buglife. Scarlett is a community engagement officer for a project in Buglife called Get London Buzzing. Scarlett will tell us all about the project and she will introduce this topic to us. So if you're in Finchley, do come and learn more about our initiative. If you are not, welcome, everyone is welcome. We're really happy to have people apparently from around the world, so that's really fantastic. And Scarlett, I just also wanted to make sure everyone knows the Q&A session will be at the end. So if you have any question, please write it down and we will make sure to leave enough time for questions. If you're new, just joined, then this webinar is being recorded. We hope that's fine, and please keep your microphones on mute until the Q&A session. Thank you, and Scarlett, thank you so much. You're wonderful to do this for us. We really appreciate it.
No, of course, it's definitely my pleasure. So yeah, I'll come to talk to you today about creating shelter and nesting habitat for pollinators. But I'll also give a brief overview of Buglife, the project that I work for, and then we can get stuck into some species and how to create those habitats for them. So who are Buglife? Well, Buglife is the only organisation in Europe devoted to the conservation of all invertebrates, and our aim is to halt the extinction of these species and to achieve sustainable populations. Invertebrates are vitally important to a healthy planet. Humans and other life forms could not survive without them. The food we eat, the fish we catch, the birds we see, the flowers we smell simply would not exist without bugs. Invertebrates underpin all life on Earth, and without them our world ecosystems would collapse. So there are more than 40,000 invertebrate species in the UK, and many of these are really struggling and under threat. In Britain, 40% of insect species are in decline and 1/3 are endangered. They are disappearing 8 times faster than mammals and birds. And this is, in this picture, we've got some of the species that we've championed in the past and have been kind of our conservation projects before. And yeah, this project isn't species specific focused, it's more about pollinators in general. So the importance of pollinators, when we look at all these things, what do they have in common? Well, many of our fruits, vegetables, nuts, and even chocolate relies on insect pollination. So in fact, 1 in 3 mouthfuls of food rely on pollinating insects. And this is 90% of world's crop species, which is quite nice because it enables us to put an economic worth on the ecosystem service that they're providing. So worldwide, 132 billion per annum is the economic worth for pollinating insects. And they're also really important because they help to maintain a healthy environment. So Many plants rely on insects to pollinate their flowers and to complete their reproductive cycle, and the majority of plants can't set seed without being pollinated. So it's estimated that about 80% of the wildflowers rely on insect pollination. And these plants and flowers in turn provide food and shelter for other species of insect, as well as birds and mammals. So it's almost impossible to overemphasize the importance of the service pollinators perform for us. What are pollinators though? So often when we talk about pollinators, our minds kind of drift instantly to bees, but there are in fact many different insects that pollinate plants. So butterflies and moths we know of, but flies are very important pollinators, including our hoverflies. Beetles pollinate, and even wasps. So lots of people ask me at work, what is the point of wasps? Well, they are in fact pollinators, and actually all of our bees have evolved from wasps, so they are a wonderful species. Approximately 6,000 different species in total are regular flower visitors in the UK. And that's about 1,500 butterflies and moths, 1,500 flies, of which 280 are hoverflies. We also have roughly 270 species of bees. And the bees are our most significant pollinators, followed by flies and hoverflies grouped together, and then butterflies and moths. And the reason why bees are the most significant ones is because they're actually purposely visiting the flowers to collect pollen to take back to the nests to feed to their young, whereas the others are kind of visiting flowers to get the nectar sources. So because the pollen, because they are collecting the pollen specifically, that's why they are fantastic pollinators. So looking at bees in a little bit more detail, I start with the honeybee because I think this is the one that most people think of when we talk about bees. They're social insects. They live in colonies of up to 40,000 individuals. You have the queen bee and the workers and males, and they kind of work together to provision the nest and maintain the colony. They tend to get a lot of press when pollination is mentioned, and they're often the first species that we think about. But it's just kind of to note that they are sort of tend to be farmed and managed by humans for their honey. And I think, keeping honeybees is a wonderful thing to do, and I think it really connects you to your food and to these amazing creatures. But it's just something to note that there is evidence that honeybees can pose a threat to wild pollinators. And this is purely because, well, not purely, but predominantly because you're suddenly introducing 40,000 individuals into an area, and it leads to an increase in floral competition. So this is why we recommend creating an additional 2 hectares of wildflower-rich habitat per every additional hive, so that there's plenty of flowers for these honeybees to make that amazing honey for people, and for also the additional native bees as well. And we've got more information about this on our website, which I'll share. I'll probably mention a few things as we go along, and I'll share all the links in the chat at the end. So moving on to bumblebees, we have 25 species of bumblebee in the UK. They live in colonies of between 50 to 400 individuals, depending on the species, so much smaller. But they are still social insects. They have the kind of similar principle of working together to maintain a colony. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about their different nesting habits later. But the other 245 or so species of bee are our solitary bees, and they're kind of lesser known, but as their name suggests, they do not live in a colony. Each female solitary bee provisions her own nest, and although they can sometimes nest in large groups or aggregations of the same species, they are not social, and they don't usually work together. Each female is collecting pollen to provision her own nest. And I selected these species to show you here just to kind of highlight the diversity of bees that we have. They can look nothing like what people expect. We have yellow-faced bee in the top left. We've got pantaloon bees, which have these big furry pantaloons or trousers. The silvery leafcutter bee, this male here, he has absolutely beautiful green eyes. We even have metallic green bees. This is furry bee. It's about this small. It's a little metallic green bee that we have. The large sharp-tailed bee is very distinctive, black and white, not black and yellow as we typically learn, and it's got a pointed abdomen coming down like this, hence the name sharp-tail. And yeah, we have blood bees as well, which aren't as sinister as it sounds. They're just named after kind of this blood red abdomen. But yeah, they can come look completely different to how we've learned, and they also have fascinating ecologies as well. But broadly speaking, their nesting ecology, they're split into two categories. So we have ground nesters and aerial nesters. The ground nesting bees often nest in places such as loose sandy soil, short grass, and patches of bare ground. When you're out and about, you might have noticed kind of little tiny molehills. These are likely the nests of ground nesting bees. We also have aerial nesters, which nest in places such as old walls, hollow plant stems, dead wood, cliff faces, and they make use of bee hotels as well. So they go into those two groups, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. Solitary bees also differ greatly in the plants that they visit for pollen. So some species will happily visit many different types of flowers, whereas other species only take pollen from one particular plant. So a species I was working on before in Cornwall is the large scabious mining bee, and it only takes pollen from one flower, the field scabious flower. So if it doesn't have those, even you can have a wonderful wildflower meadow, but if it doesn't have the flowers that these bees specifically are collecting from, then we're still going to see declines in those bees. And it's also worth noting here that different species of bee are able to fly different distances. This is generally linked to the size of the bee. So some of our larger bees, like bumblebees, can travel for a kilometre, for example, which is an incredible feat considering their size. However, the average distance of a solitary bee, like the ones that we see here, is closer to 300 meters. So they want to find in a radius of their nest of about 300 meters enough flowers to sustain the populations. And that's also, so not only having kind of these patches, but also thinking about how they can move through the landscape. If there's not another flower for them to kind of refuel on 300 meters away, then they can't move through our habitats. So that's something to think about. But unfortunately, there is a problem with our pollinator populations. They are in decline. So half of our 27 bumblebee species are in decline. Earlier I said we had 25 species. That's because 2 of them are now extinct. And 7 of them have declined more than 50% in the last 25 years. 2/3 of our moths and 71% of our butterflies are in long-term decline. And across Europe as a whole, 38% of bee and hoverfly species in decline, and only 12% are increasing. These are tend to be the more generalist species that also undertake migrations and things like this. So there is very clearly an issue that needs to be addressed here. But what are the causes of these declines? So habitat loss is the major factor. If there's no food and no nesting places for our pollinators, they just have nowhere to live. The UK's lost 97% of its flower-rich grasslands since the 1940s, which is an area the size of Wales. So we have lost a lot of this flower-rich meadows. And this is kind of primarily due to the increase in and intensification of agriculture since the Second World War. So with kind of technological advances in farming activities, mechanized to be made much more efficient. Seed is more efficiently cleaned of these kind of weed species, which are fantastic for pollinators often. Farmers were motivated and incentivized to increase their field sizes, remove hedgerows. It was kind of dig for Britain. We needed to have enough food after the war, and many of the grasslands were ploughed up for growing crops. So that's kind of a big factor in the loss of habitat. Alongside that, there's also been increased use of both pesticides and herbicides. And these chemicals have far-reaching consequences for invertebrates beyond simple target pest species. Neonicotinoid insecticides, for example, have been shown to have harmful effects on wildlife, from bumblebees and solitary bees to aquatic invertebrates and even birds. And both the changes in agriculture and also our increasing urbanisation in areas such as London have led to the few remaining high quality wildlife sites that we do have existing as these isolated patches. They're kind of islands of habitat that there's no way for our wildlife to travel between them. And this is going to become increasingly a problem with climate change as species' natural ranges need to shift and they can't move through the habitat. So fragmentation of these is going to be a really big problem, bigger than it already is, problem. And within our urban areas, we've had kind of, we overmanage a lot of our green spaces. We have this sort of expectation for neat and tidiness, leading to a lot of short mown grass and nothing else. And we look at it and we see green grass and we think nature, but there's no flowers there, and it's not a good habitat for pollinators at all. Thankfully, this does seem to be gradually improving, starting to see councils making greater effort to leave some areas and roadside verges longer so flowers can grow. But many people, in their own gardens, they don't want to or don't have the time to garden. They pave them over for parking or replace them with artificial grass, which is just full of plastic. So there's a huge loss of habitat within our urban areas as well. This is kind of a depressing slide, but it isn't kind of all is lost. We can and will make changes, and especially in all of our gardens, we can create so much habitat for pollinators and for species to move through these urban landscapes. So I'm going to do the dreaded thing of trying to play a video.
We all see wildflowers as beautiful and great for our well-being.
Should there be sound, Scarlett? Because we can't hear it.
You can't hear it. Oh, okay. Well, yes. To be sound, I should have got the one with the subtitles as well. Okay. So I can introduce beelines. They're an imaginative and beautiful solution to the problem of the loss of flowers and pollinators. And what we're creating is this, we can see here, this series of insect superhighways. And it's really a framework to kind of say, with limited resources and limited time, where should we prioritize connecting these habitats? And we're looking to kind of restore and create wildflower-rich stepping stones within these beelines, to create a network like a railway that will weave across the British landscape. And this provides large areas of brand new habitat benefiting bees and butterflies, but also a host of other wildlife. So by focusing our effort to create more flower-rich areas within the 3-kilometre wide beelines. We can all do our bit to help. So any habitat creation, no matter how small, can help, whether it's a meadow in a farmland, in a school playing field, or in a garden, or just a little window box or planter. Everyone can do their bit and nothing is too small, so it's very much a joint effort. And this video is just kind of a call to action, but I do apologise about the sound. So I'll just go to the next slide. So after identifying more potential routes for pollinators in London, Buglife mapped a new beeline that weaves across the east to west, across London. And we've worked in mapping these with GIGGLE, which is Green Space Information for Greater London. So it's the city's environmental records centre. And we launched this new beeline in January, and inviting everyone to contribute and add their pollinator projects to the online beelines map. So I know in Finchley you're very close to our beeline, and we'd love to see your contributions up there. And to coincide with the launch of the new beeline, we've launched the new project Get London Buzzing, which is creating opportunities for people who live and work in London to help pollinating insects in their local areas. And this is the project that I deliver, which is generously funded predominantly by Consumer Trust, but also Green UK and Milky Wire. So a little insight into the project that I'm delivering over the coming years. We're looking to create 5 hectares of wildflower-rich habitat across London. And we have some exciting opportunities to get really creative with this, such as these vertical meadows, also living green roofs. And with the habitat created, I'll be leaving landowners with 10-year management plans to ensure the area can continue to support pollinators long after the project has ended. I'm also visiting different landowners across London to give one-to-one habitat management advice, as well as delivering a series of events and workshops to showcase how best to create and maintain pollinator-friendly habitats in gardens and green spaces. Developing wildflower habitat creation guidance documents for local councils to transform these kind of traditionally managed spaces like this with the short mown grass. And I'll also be producing a Get London Buzzing pack, which I would be more than happy to share with this group when it's ready, because it will have things about how to create your own meadows and things like this. So I would love to share that with the Finchley Pollinator Project when it's ready. I also work with the next generation in our kind of local primary schools, and we create wildflower habitat on the school grounds. I also give training in flower insect time counts, which are a survey technique that's part of the pollinator monitoring scheme, and it's kind of a fantastic way to gather long-term data on pollinator abundance. And you simply just have to watch a patch of flowers for 10 minutes and record the different types of insects you see to kind of broad category level. So yeah, that's a really kind of valuable citizen science scheme that anyone can get involved with. And I just will highlight as well that on our website we have produced an education pack which has information and activities aged at primary school children about kind of how wonderful and diverse bees are and why they're declining and how they can help get involved. So there's lots of activities in there, and if that's of interest, another link that I will share at the end of the talk. And I'm also delivering a series of events and workshops. So through the project, I kind of want to prioritise training on how to survey and monitor and conserve and create habitats so that people are left with these skills long into the future. And I've been partnering with different organisations to reach different audiences and to increase health and well-being for people. And I'll also be giving more online talks like this. But yeah, today, as well as kind of advising on how to create the shelter and nesting habitats, I also wanted to tell you a little bit more about the ecology of some spectacular species, many of which you might be able to find in your gardens. So the hairy-footed flower bee, it's kind of often mistaken for a bumblebee, but it's actually one of our solitary bees. But you can see why it's easily confused because they're quite furry. But the females are all black and they've got these orange hind legs. And the males look very different to the females, which is relatively unusual. They're kind of gingery, they have a little yellow moustache, and they've got kind of feathered feet, hence their name, hairy-footed flower bees. And in an urban environment, they'll nest in places like old brick walls if there's little holes in there, or chimney stacks. Naturally, kind of they nest more in places like cliff faces. But they will be visiting flowers, kind of some of their favourites: dead nettles, green alkanet, primroses, and comfreys. So they like a lot of kind of early flowering species as well, and the males are often kind of the first bees to appear in spring, as early as late February, and they fly. The males fly into May, and the females kind of emerge 2 to 3 weeks later, and they'll sort of go all the way through to June. So that's what that window is. But yeah, they're one of my favorite because they're one of the first, and it's very exciting when you start seeing them. And you might have seen on Spring Watch some years ago that they have a very unusual mating behavior. So when the male kind of will start mating with this female, he waves his arms like this. They've got a very, very unusual kind of dance when they're doing that. Another species of solitary bee, we have the tawny mining bee, which is one of our most unmistakable bees. You can see they've got black hairs all on their head, and the legs are all completely black, but the body has got this beautiful tawny orange color all over. They're mining bees, so they dig their nest underground, and we see them a lot in urban spaces because they will still dig a nest in sort of managed lawns, edges of garden flower beds, kind of in green spaces. They visit flowers or shrubs like willows, blackthorn, fruit trees a lot they visit, and dandelions, so kind of love our weed species, and they fly from late March to late June. But yeah, this is one of the kind of very charismatic mining bees that you might be able to spot and ID yourself. We also have leafcutter bees. So the willow bee's leafcutter bee is kind of our most common leafcutter bee. It nests in dead wood, artificial cavities, but it will also use like holes in walls, around window frames, plant pots. They've been known to nest in hoses, even kind of folded parasols. And because they are so versatile, they're one of the ones that you would likely see use a bee hotel. They feed from various flowers, but they especially love legumes, thistles, knapweeds, and brambles. So lots of these species are great for these bees. They fly from late May to August, and you may see them flying whilst they're carrying a leaf because, as their name suggests, they use their large mandibles to cut parts of the leaves out, and they make their nests. They kind of carry it back, and they will roll the leaves into little cells. So they make cells inside the hole with the leaf. They'll collect a ball of pollen, they'll lay an egg on that, they'll seal the cell, and they'll do this all down the hole. So they make these kind of cigar-shaped structures inside the bee hotels. And you'd kind of, the only bit you get to see really is these kind of ends sort of getting filled in with leaf, but that's a clear sign that your bee hotel's being used. Another species that is, it's very likely to see in a bee hairtail is the red mason bee. So this is our most common mason bee, named from kind of the red hair on the abdomen. And they nest again in kind of cavities of walls, in the thatched roofs. They'll nest in the stems of their deadwood. So if kind of beetles have made holes in the deadwood, they can use those holes. And yeah, they are one of the first species to exploit garden bee hairtails, and they construct their nests using wet mud. So if you have like areas like puddles in your garden, they can collect the wet mud from around there and they'll carry it back on their mandibles, and then they'll use that to do the similar thing of creating those cells down that tube. So if it's filling up with mud, you're thinking I have a mason bee as opposed to a leafcutter bee. And they visit kind of a wide variety of cultivated garden plants, but they also are economically quite significant as pollinators of fruit trees and oilseed rape. So it's one of the few, well, there are several bee species which can be bought commercially in Britain to help pollinate crops. So they're one of these species, and they fly from March into July. And this bee, I wanted to highlight, it's named after its golden appearance, but this can fade during the summer, and the males, as they get sun bleached, they actually turn silvery grey with old age, which I think is quite sweet. They're predominantly a coastal species, although they can be found inland at kind of North Downs, South Downs and Salisbury Plain. They really like kind of flower rich areas, so there has to be lots of legumes such as the bird's foot trefoil. It's photographed on there, and yeah, they will fly from April to July, but by far the most fascinating thing about this species is the fact that it will use empty snail shells in their nests. So they will create the cells inside using leaf mastic, which is like chewed up leaves, and they'll kind of do that thing where they create the cells inside the snail shell. And it can also, this species, so there's only 3 species that nest in the snail shells in the UK, and this one also will like put the leaf mastic on the outside of the shell to camouflage it even greater. So it's just a very peculiar nesting habit, but it's very interesting. Yeah, and I was very excited when I saw these. And last but not least, this is a Gooden's nomad bee, and the first thing that might strike you about it is its appearance. It looks rather like a wasp, but it is a bee. In fact, it's a special type of bee called a cuckoo bee. So like the birds, the cuckoos, they lay their eggs in the nests of other solitary bees. And so this species parasitizes a few different types of mining bee, buffish mining bee, grey patch mining bee, and cliff mining bee. So they would be associated with those bees. And I know parasitize kind of sounds like a bad thing, but in fact, actually 30 to 40% of our bee fauna are kleptoparasites, and they are an important part of the diversity, and they do indicate that we've got healthy host populations. So they're definitely not something to be discouraged. It's fantastic to see them. And yeah, so they don't collect pollen. They're not visiting flowers for that reason. They're visiting them to get the nectar. So they'll visit dandelions and buttercups, cow's parsley. So they love a lot of our kind of traditional weed species. But yeah, they don't collect their own pollen. They will just go in and lay their eggs on the ball, and then their larvae will hatch out first and eat the pollen that was collected for the other species, and sometimes they can eat the larvae as well. But yeah, their flight season tends to overlap with the host species, so between April to June. But what can we do to provide nesting and shelter for some of these kind of fantastic species that we see? Obviously, there's huge diversity, and those are just a few that I chose to highlight that, yeah, I hope you'd be able to see if you make a few changes. So just to reiterate that nothing we do is too small to be worthwhile. So every tiny action can make a really big difference. And you can help by providing some natural nesting places. So bare soil, short grass are really fantastic for different mining bees. Dead wood, with which the beetles will use to create cavities in, so then that arts and wild aerial nesters can use the dead wood, and just leaving untouched parts of the garden. So if you have hollow stems in place, things like this, they can nest in those. You can also provide artificial places such as bee hotels or bee banks, which I'll tell you a little bit more about how to do that. And helping insects find places to shelter over winter is really important. So many bees remain in the nesting sites until the spring, but for other invertebrates, it's important to not be too keen when you're tidying up your garden for winter. Yeah, one of the best things you can do is nothing. If you leave dead leaves where they are, or if you want to rake them into a leaf pile in your corner, that would be great. Corner of your garden, sorry, that would be great. And leaving the plant stems in particular can be really great if you leave them until spring, when the weather starts to warm up, because it's a good place for them to stay warm. And just having corners of the garden that maybe you want to have a kind of nice tidy garden, I understand that, but you can leave like a corner undisturbed, providing safe places for these creatures to shelter throughout the season. So yeah, doing less can be more, and just having these sort of undisturbed wild areas, and always be thinking about kind of leaving a diversity of habitats. So yeah, just kind of having overgrown areas, some with long grasses, some with bare soil, having dead wood, having rock piles. The more diversity of habitats you have, the more diversity of species you will have. So I'm going to talk through a bit about what you can do, as well as just leaving things to be a bit more wild. You can create some things. So for like the mining bees that we saw, the tawny mining bee, that beautiful orange colored one, or this is a very, again, striking bee that's quite easy to get your ID in once you've seen it, is black and white. It's called ashy mining bee. There's different species like this that would love to have a bee bank. So they provide kind of warm, sheltered patches of bare ground for them to nest in. So when you are choosing selecting your spot, you want it to be very sunny, south facing, and we recommend a crescent moon shape because it kind of helps to trap in the warmth. And this one is huge, but it can be any size from any size is fine if you just have a small area in your garden, or you can have one that extends the whole length of an entire field. It's just down to your manpower, I guess, and your drive. But yeah, to manage it, you would clear a section back to bare ground every year. So they want the bare, it will start to naturally vegetate, but we do want the bare soil. That's what we're trying to create. But you want to minimize disturbance. So that's kind of why I recommend doing sections. So for example, if you have like a smaller bee bank, then you could do half in 1 year, and do the other half the next year, just to kind of minimize the disturbance of this area. And the best time to weed this in the year is February. This will be the least disturbance to any solitary bees that are in there. And we kind of always recommend as well not to plant on the actual bank, but this will kind of help it stay this sort of open, sandy, bare soil for longer. And we do have guidance on this, but essentially what you're doing is you're kind of digging a hole in the shape of the bee bank that you're going to create. you'll put the turf that you have first upside down, lay it down, and then build up the soil on top. And then we recommend capping this bank with like 30 centimeters deep builder's sand is really great for this, and you can kind of like firm that down, and that gives this sandy substrate for them to mine into. And yeah, and then once it's completed, you kind of want to leave it like that, but weed it once a year so that you're keeping this bare soil habitat. Another type of bees, more common, is the solitary bee hotels that we see. They tend to be made up of bamboo canes or holes drilled into logs or bricks, or just kind of bundles of dead wood, hollow stems or dead reeds, things like this. We recommend with the entrance holes to be between 2 and 10 millimeters. So anything bigger than 1 centimeter is it's not going to be used by any UK species of bee. You might get lots of species of spiders using them. But yeah, if you're looking to attract bees, then we recommend 2 to 10 millimeters. And just to be kind of aware of that, because a lot of the ones that you can buy in stores and things have much bigger holes than we recommend, and that's because they're often made in places like China, where their bee species are bigger. So it's better to have the smaller holes and to have a diversity in the size of holes so that you're attracting different species. The other thing that's really important to note is the depth. So we say at least 10 centimeters, so between 10 and 20 centimeters is a good depth for these, and that's because, as I described, they kind of create these cells down the tube, like this, with each egg in. And what they'll do is they first lay females at the back, and they lay males at the front, because the males are going to emerge first. So if the tubes are too short, then we get this skew in the sex of the species, which can have a big impact generations down. So that's why we recommend at least 10 centimeters in depth. And another good thing is if it can have like a water resistant frame over it to keep it a bit more dry. Positioning your bee hotel, this is one of the kind of simplest fixes that I can sort of recommend. So this is a photo of a bee hotel that I was asked to advise on. They weren't sure, why bees weren't using it, and aside from kind of the lack of materials, it was sort of destined to only be ever used by spiders. It's in a really shaded spot, so we recommend placing it in full sun in a south facing position. We recommend it being securely fastened at least 1 meter off the ground, and kind of to keep it clear of other plants and other obstructions, and this will just sort of, these things, the position kind of really helps to keep it warm and to prevent damp, because solitary bees use the sun coming in to warm up the nest, and then once they're warm, they can then go off and forage. So if it's in a shadier place or that's not getting enough direct sunlight, then they have a shorter foraging time each day. So that's why the south facing and full sun is really, really important for solitary bees. And when you're maintaining your bee hotel, and this is just to highlight as well, this photo, that it can be simple as just a bundle of canes or reeds, or just a little block with these holes drilled in. Some of these are actually made from clay as well. They don't have to be kind of overly complicated structures. You can make some really nice simple ones, but it's with maintaining them, you want to check that it's staying dry. You can kind of repair it or place it where it's needed. We do recommend with the if you're drilling into a log, that every 2 years you replace those to kind of prevent a build of parasites. But you can kind of see, you can monitor, when they've been used and things like this, and whether they're getting damp, and you can monitor it from there. And we do recommend, if you've got ones like these ones here, these little ones unroofed, to take them inside to a cool, dry place over winter. So like your shed would be perfect, and it kind of will keep them dry and prevent fungal infection. And then after frosts, obviously remember to put them back outside, so any nest, any eggs inside can emerge. So bumblebees are very different, and also I've popped a picture up on here because they look very different. They're not like these kind of neat hives that the honeybees make. They're much untidier. It's kind of these lumps of wax cells and pollen lumps, and the queen will make these little pots which she puts nectar in. So when it's a really cold or rainy day, she can stay and she can drink the nectar, and she can be shivering her muscles on the eggs to keep them warm. So that's why they've got these kind of little pot structures in there. And so bumblebees nest in different places, depending on the species. So some nest on the ground in kind of thick tussocky grasses, such as our common carder bumblebee, which is a lovely kind of ginger fuzzy bee, which gets its name carder from the old textile term to card, because they will kind of card or comb pieces of moss to make a really nice nest for their young. And so with the kind of with creating habitat for them, for example, you would be leaving a patch of taller grass undisturbed from March to October. Definitely just leave it undisturbed. Another way to get bumblebees to nest in your garden would be to place a bird box, and this would attract our tree bumblebees. So they are, a lovely bumblebee with a kind of gingery thorax. They're black and they've got a white tail. They are actually not native to the UK. They arrived, but they have been here for I don't know how long now actually, but they kind of don't outcompete any of other bumblebees because they nest up in these tree hollows, and naturally tree hollows, but they do use bird boxes, and they don't really carry the nesting materials as much, so you can kind of make a cozy warm home for them by lining it with dry leaves or moss or wool or even pet hair. And when you're positioning for a bumblebee, you want to place it in north facing, because bumblebees don't like to get direct sunlight on their nests. So it's the opposite to the solitary bees that want the south facing. The bumblebees want the north facing. But one of the best things that you can do for creating nests for bumblebees is really just to be less tidy and to leave areas undisturbed. So they will nest in places like under garden sheds, in undisturbed corners, in hedgerows. So we recommend not strimming your hedge banks, and this can also as well mean you get more mice and voles, and the bees will use often old rodent burrows. So three of our most common species, the white-tailed, the buff-tailed and the garden bumblebee, they all nest in old rodent burrows, so they'll kind of be searching for those in the grass. We also species can use compost heaps, so if you have a compost heap, that's fantastic. But if you see the bees nesting in there, you're very, very lucky. Maybe not turning it over whilst the bees are in there. But you can also build a bumblebee home. It can be kind of a fun activity to do, especially with children, and you just need a flower pot, kind of piece of slate to go over the top, and a tube or pipe, so like an old bit of hose cut off or something like this. So you kind of want to sink the flower pot into the ground. You use the slate to cover the drainage holes to keep the rain out, and then you kind of put the hose underground to the pot, so they've got this burrow that's emulating an old rodent burrow. And one thing to kind of remember is to put drainage holes in the pipe so that definitely doesn't fill with water. And then finally, like under the flower pot, you want to have kind of a generous amount of nesting material, and because they are looking for old rodent burrows, you can have great success in attracting them by using old bedding from, like, if you have a pet mouse or a guinea pig or something like this, old rodent bedding. Yeah, your pet bedding you can put there, and the smell can help attract them. And so thinking about, I've talked a lot about bees because they're fantastic. I think all bugs are fantastic, but I do a lot with solitary bees because, just to mention before as well, Bumblebee Conservation Trust do fantastic guides on all of this, and they have a lot of information on that. And Butterfly Conservation Trust have a lot of information for moths and butterflies, and again I will link these later. But thinking about kind of moths and butterflies, obviously providing nectar for adult butterflies is a great way to help, but you invited me to kind of talk more about the nesting, and the best way to do this is sort of to let an area go wild. So many of our kind of regular butterflies that we get, such as speckled wood, gatekeeper, meadow brown, all of their caterpillars eat common grasses, but only when they're left to grow tall. So that's why it's really important to sort of leave that area alone, and many moths will benefit from this as well. And the other thing you can do, as well as providing flowers for the adults, is to have plants for the caterpillars. It's very important, and the caterpillars are much more fussy eaters, so they will have yes, different species will feed on different species. So stinging nettles are great for common butterfly, red admiral, also the scarlet tiger moth and snout moth, for example. Holly and ivy are great for our holly blue butterfly. Buckthorn is great for brimstone. Garlic mustard is great for our orange tip butterfly. And bird's foot trefoil is great for our common blue butterfly. And then pictured here is ragwort for our cinnabar moth, which is a day-flying moth, very beautiful, and they have these kind of fantastic caterpillars that have these wonderful markings. And just to kind of, I know that ragwort has a bit of a bad rep because if it's dried in hay, it can be dangerous to horses. But it is a really important food plant for a lot of our pollinators, lots of bees as well. And insects have kind of specialized on it because of this, because if they get the enzymes to break down these toxins of the plant, then they've kind of got a new niche that they can be in, a competitive edge. Like they don't have to compete with other species because they have this kind of unique ability to break it down. So we do see some species that kind of are specialized onto ragwort, and it's just a fantastic plant if you are able to leave it in your garden, and that is be amazing. And then thinking about nesting for hoverflies as well. So flies are fantastic pollinators as well. And we have 280 species of hoverfly in the UK, which are very important pollinators, but sadly they are in decline. And some species of hoverfly have an aquatic larval stage. So like this tiger hoverfly that's pictured here, which has these wonderful stripes. They have a little kind of like a larval stage that's aquatic, and you can, that naturally they would be having this habitat in sort of these kind of holes in trees called rot holes that fill with water, and these are quite rare in our gardens at the moment. So you can kind of recreate this habitat in a super simple way, reusing an old milk bottle. So you kind of just add drainage holes near the top, you pack it with leaf litter or grass, and then you fill the water up below the drainage holes. You put some dry leaf litter on top, you stand it kind of in a leaf of dry trays, and you have these sticks that go in so that they can, they're sticking out, and that's a perfect breeding ground for hoverflies. And there's kind of more information on this on the Buzz Club, and they have a monitoring. They encourage you to kind of go out and see and do your surveys of your hoverfly lagoon every month, and they have a lot more information on creating that habitat there. But just to kind of say that adding water to an area, just having either a pond or even just a bucket of water can really greatly help, because not only do some of these pollinators have aquatic life cycles, pretty much everything needs to drink. So it's one of the best things that you can do to improve biodiversity in your garden is to have a pond or a wildlife bucket. So obviously I'm coming here today to talk to you about nesting things, but it's just really, really kind of important to note that that is not enough by itself. They also, all pollinators will need something to eat. So by providing flowers, the aim is to kind of have this continuous succession from spring to autumn. That's when kind of most pollinators are active, and so we really encourage people to extend the flowering season by thinking about these early flowering like primrose, my mind's going to go blank, crocuses, things like these species, and to kind of be aware of getting the native native breed of that plant, because for example, like our native daffodils are fantastic for pollinators, but we have a lot of species that have been cultivated, and actually they don't have the pollen and nectar for them to access. So having kind of native early flowering, they're really, really important for bumblebees, the queen bumblebees that emerge. They are going to be looking for food, and with climate change we're going to be seeing them emerging at more different times when there's not the floral resources when they come out. So that's something that we can do in our gardens, is to create ensure that there's flowering habitat all year round, or for a longer season, and same with the late season flowers as well, things like the field scabious and knapweeds and things like this. Providing this late flowering habitat is really important, and it's one that we've seen a huge decline in, because they often get cut down before they've had an opportunity to sow seed. So yeah, the things to be thinking of, yes, we kind of encourage planting native flowers, but understand that in your garden you might want some non-native species, and this can actually be a really great way of extending the flowering season. The only thing to be wary of is planting any kind of double or hybrid varieties, as they can be sterile, or they don't have any pollen, or they become kind of too fancy for the insects to access the pollen, because they've got all these elaborate, beautiful flowers. So obviously you can have those flowers, but it's great to think about having other flowers alongside, and just being aware that not all flowers are great for pollinators. And one thing to notice is that is that different bees and pollinators have different length tongues, and this kind of impacts the flowers that they're able to access. So our garden bumblebee is the bee that has the longest tongue in the UK. Is 2 centimeters long, so it's the length of its body, and that allows it to access deep flowers such as foxgloves and things like this, these big bell flowers, but lots of other species wouldn't be able to access those, and they kind of, they have their preferences. So when you're planting, you can think about having a sort of a selection of different shapes of flowers that have different levels of accessibility to the pollen, and just having this diversity. As I mentioned, some species feed on specific plants, so having a greater diversity is going to encourage greater diversity of pollinators as well. You can help the pollinators by leaving your lawn to go longer, cutting it less frequently. You could cut it on a higher setting that allows things like clovers and that to blossom, and you could just leave certain areas uncut. Other things is to avoid using herbicides and insecticides, kind of should go without saying, but even the organic insecticides are designed to kill, so they're not really better than the chemical ones, and they aren't just affecting target species. Many people already have, but ensuring that you're using peat-free compost whenever you need to buy any. This helps prevent the destruction of peat bogs, which are not only vital wildlife habitat for many endangered invertebrates, but they're also a great carbon sink and absorb and store a lot of carbon dioxide, so peat-free. And something you might not have thought about, but you can reduce light pollution. So there's growing evidence on the negative impacts of light pollution, and it should be treated with the same content that we have for all other forms of pollution, but it's very much kind of just emerging in people's thoughts. We're all kind of familiar with this image of insects flying around a light at night, but unfortunately this attraction can have fatal consequences for the insects involved. Exhaustion, increased predation, disrupted ability to navigate are just some of the reasons why up to a third of insects attracted to these lights die. And this situation is so serious that the light pollution is reducing nocturnal pollinator visits to flowers by 62% in some areas. So the good news is unlike other forms of pollution, it doesn't persist in the environment afterwards, so it can be solved with a flick of the switch. And things that we encourage is to only add light where and when you need it. So you can have sensors like this. Use only the brightest light that you need, so you don't need a daylight bright light at night. You can have kind of these warmer tones that are less damaging. You can add shielding to your lights, so that it's only shining where it needs. And also, if you're turning your lights on at night in your home, if you shut your curtains, then you're not disorientating insects kind of flying past. And you can share the message about reducing light pollution, or contact elected officials. But that's one of our campaigns that we have going at the moment, is to raise awareness of light pollution. So I will post this link in the chat, but we would really love to see anything that you do for pollinators, anything that you've done before, if it's creating meadows, if it's creating nesting habitat that we've talked about today. No matter how small or big, it will make an impact, and you can see all these dots building on the map and how all of our work is working together to connect these habitats for pollinators. Thank you for listening. Do we have any questions?
Thank you so much, Scarlett. This has been so engaging, and I'm sure all of us learned a lot, much more beyond nesting, and thank you so much. It's such an amazing summary of everything we need to know, I think. So really, thank you so much. Are you able to stay maybe another 5-10 minutes for questions?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't notice the time. This is
No.
I was worried I'd go over on tangents, but yeah, I'm more than happy to stay for questions. Yeah,
No worries. Can you let us know with the upturned flower pot,
yes.
what side does it need to turn into? So is it north? Is it south?
North facing for bees, so that where the tube comes out, and to have it in kind of a more shaded, sheltered area, because they don't want their nest to get too hot. They've got a lot more activity in their nest, and they also have the kind of ability to warm it up. So having it more in a kind of more sheltered area and north facing.
Okay, fantastic. So a bee house, if it's about a few stories high up, so if it's an apartment building and
Yes.
it's quite high, will that still work if it's facing south?
Yeah, it should do. I mean, as I kind of mentioned, bees have been found to nest in chimney stacks. So like they will nest up high if the habitat's up there, and they can still get to a lot of floral resources that are nearby. So it's as long as the foraging distance is okay. I don't think that's a problem, and it's worth worth a try.
Okay. Scarlett, I've read that big bee hotels, the one that we often see in videos or are done in public spaces, can create some infestations and things like that. It's almost like a huge snack for predators compared with smaller ones. So what's your opinion on this issue? Is it better to just create, a small bee hotel in a tin with some canes, or go big?
I'm not sure what is kind of objectively best. And I'm not sure. Obviously, yeah, if you've got a lot more activity at an area, you can be attracting predators. But some species do naturally nest in these aggregations, even the solitary bees, and they will nest kind of next to each other, even though they're not working together. So I think I'm not sure if there's an objective answer. I think I'd kind of encourage people to do sort of what works best in their spaces.
You've mentioned that it's best to leave dead plants until spring. Until when in spring? Is it March? Is it June? Is it
So I think it's when the plants start flowering again, you're seeing this new growth. So you're going to see the kind of, you're going to regain that habitat, and also thinking about sort of, if it's been warm enough for this, if there were species in there nesting to have emerged. So it's kind of you're kind of monitoring your plant and looking at when it's starting to grow, and also thinking about where you are based in the UK. Have you had like the end of sort of your cold snaps and spring's actually really started? Obviously it kind of differs a little bit in the UK, but yeah.
Good. So it's not just about the date, it's about the weather, and
it's about the weather, which is going to change each year, and it's about because the reason we want that is so that they have that place to hibernate until there is full warmth of spring, and also it's about having we kind of recommend leaving it until there is new growth, so there's the new area for them to shelter in.
Fascinating. Does anyone have any other question? We are going to record, that we're recording it, but we're going to upload it to our project's YouTube channel. So you will be able to revisit, and we will also send an email to everyone registered with the relevant links that Scarlett has shared, such as the animated video and any important links, maybe the presentation, if she agrees, any important information that we shared. We will create a list so you can refer back to that as well. So unless anyone has any question.
Yeah, I just had one question if I could.
Yes,
Sherry, and thank you so much for convening this. It's been just incredibly interesting, incredibly helpful. Scarlett, of course, thank you. It was really, really interesting. Learn things from every aspect of feeding to habitats to life cycles and stuff. It will be great to have the presentation. My mum, who's actually put me onto this, she is one of the organisers at the allotments just up here in Barnet. So we're just to the north of Shuri's project. So I suppose that kind of rounded off, and she'd like to see the presentation. It just rounded off kind of the idea in my head about if we kind of aggregated this area of North London, what kind of strategy, what would you be saying would be like the best kind of strategy for on a species level or on a kind of overall level for getting pollinators, you know, giving them the habitats and giving them a food? Is there a kind of overarching idea?
I would say it's the most important thing is to have this floral resources, and to have a diversity of that. If you are aware that there's certain pollinators in your area that you want to attract, then you can do reach out to me, and I can kind of advise on specific food plants. But generally, just having this great diversity of bee friendly, pollinator friendly species, and if you need help kind of with compiling lists, then I can signpost some to you. But also the RHS has a fantastic list of different pollinating friendly species. But yeah, my strategy would be to create this kind of really fantastic area of floral resources, and you can have areas that have are kind of bigger, better, but also more joined up, so having all these connecting ones in between. So if you've got kind of two good wildlife areas, like maybe in Finchley and up here, having the gardens in between, having these pollinator pit stops is how I like to think of them, in between, so that they can move between these areas. So yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Really interesting.
So thank you so much to Scarlett, and thank you for everyone who joined us today. Really appreciate your time, and let's keep in touch. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And I will send you those links so you can circulate, and the presentation as well, if that's helpful for people. Fantastic. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Scarlett. So I think you can finish the meeting, I think, as the host. And thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
We can stay in touch.
Bye.
Bye-bye.